Good morning, Rotarians and friends. Thank you for joining us today on CWRAP Conversations with Rotary Action People. I'm Mary Gask. I'm just 1/3 of the CWRAP team. Donald Hovis is at some exotic island, I think it's Hilton Head, doing leadership training and won't be with us today. So Terry and I are holding down the fort. Terry is our communications officer, and I don't think we say this enough, but Terry Moore, thank you so much because you make this happen for us 3 times a week in addition to all the other things that you're working on with the district. So thank you very much. I'd like to take a minute to have you sign in the chat box, tell us your name and your club so that we can go back later on and look and see who was here joining us. A few announcements today. Pauline has a happy hour coming up on, it's the 3rd Thursday of every month. So that would be, what's the 3rd Thursday? What's that date, Pauline?
Sorry, I was muted. 17th.
17th, absolutely. 17th, and it's from 5 to 6:30. I understand last time they had a happy hour. It was a pretty lively group. So you might want to get your glass of wine that Fred's going to tell you how to make today and bring it to the happy hour so you'll be all set. The other announcement I wanted to make is we have a strategic planning seminar planned on Tuesday, September the 29th from 6 to 8. And this is going to be run by our Rotary International Zone 33-34 Director, Stephanie Urchek. And Stephanie has a lot of experience in this, so you might want to mark that on your calendar to attend that. And one other announcement, we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the Wayne Boumier, I think I'm saying his name correctly, with Disaster USA, and he didn't make the meeting. And we found out today, he sent us a text message. It's because he was in Louisiana helping out with the hurricane. So we're going to get Wayne back on the program at a later date. But we appreciate him letting us know what happened there. So today, I'm excited about announcing who our speaker is because he's not only a friend, he's a fellow Rotarian in my 5 Points Rotary Club. Fred is a retired psychology professor from the University of South Carolina. And after retirement, he decided he wasn't finished yet. So he opened up his own, I guess it's a counseling service.
Private practice.
Right, that keeps him pretty busy. He hails from Philadelphia. I hope I'm right on this history. And if any of you ever go back and look at some old American bandstands, you might find Fred on 1 or 2 of those. His dad had some connections with the music industry, and I think Fred kind of pull some strings to get on the show. He and his wife, Marcy, as I said, are members of the 5 Points Rotary Club. They're both past presidents. And their first love is cruising, but because of COVID, they've not been able to cruise. And I'll tell you, they enjoy it so much, it makes for very good fodder at the 5 Points Friday happy hour. They give fun dollars all the time. Marcy is holding her face. There you go. But today, in Fred's spare time, he makes wine, and he's going to share with us how he does that. So, Fred, how long have you been making homemade wine?
Well, thank you, Mary. I want to open up. Can everybody hear me? Mary, can you hear me well?
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. I want to kind of open up with a bandstand story because that's kind of going around for a long time, and we'll jump right into wine. Actually, although my dad was in the music business for many, many, many years, our neighbor's father was the cameraman on American Bandstand, and this would have been around 58 or 59. And so I got to go backstage as a kid. I was not a dancer or anything like that because those dancers now today are like 80 years old. So I don't want you to think I was a dancer at American Bandstand when we went backstage. So I've been making wine for, homemade wine now for about 15 years. I'm going to talk to you all about that. I started when Marcy saw like in a Walmart, a box of kind of making your own wine. And you made it was like, $15, $20. And you made your own wine, but you made 4 bottles. And to be honest, everybody, to make 4 bottles is as much work as making 30, 40, or or 50 bottles. So I don't encourage anybody from the get-go who's interested in winemaking to necessarily start with a small kit. Although the advantage you have with a small kit is you don't have the cost of the materials, kind of basically. So I've been doing it for about 15 years. And what I want to let everybody know, the fun is not just in the making. It's in the naming. We'll talk a little bit about that today. It's in the bottling. It's in the part of the production right now. I've just started a brand new batch. I usually make 1 or 2 batches a year. And so the wine is at a stage where the yeast has been added about 2 or 3 days ago. And so it smells awesome. Okay, so if any of you like to visit a winery and you can sort of identify with that smell of going into a winery and smelling the stuff in the background, that's what my house smells like right now. And it's great. That's my favorite time.
But Fred, why wine? I mean, you could easily be making beer.
It's true. Well, my family knows that I've had a love of wine for a really, really, really long time. Now, like a lot of people, I started drinking some wine, like in college. When I went to college, the drinking age was 18. And we all started on rosé wines. I mean, most of us, in my early 70s, most of us started with Lancers and Métis, a little bit of the Blue Nine, because I've been drinking that sort of for a long time. And then maybe 25 years ago, I got into a society in Columbia called the Bacchus Society. Charleston has one as well. And South Carolina has some very serious wine drinkers. In fact, the history of wine making in South Carolina is really an awesome one. It goes back to a guy named Nicholas Herbemont, somewhere around the 1820s. And he came over from France. Many of our Rotarians know that the history of South Carolina has always been a very open and welcoming history for different kinds of people. And so the French Huguenots came over, and he was one of those. And at one point, prior to the Civil War, he was getting more money for his wine than actually anybody else in the United States. And the first time Viognier was planted and grown in the New World was at a vineyard on like Bull Street, literally within 5 minutes of where my office is right now. So everybody knows that I like wine. So I got this wine kit, and people say, hey, maybe you'd be interested in making wine. That's how I got started.
Super.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you and Marcy probably do not have big barrels out in the backyard, and this is probably a Lucille Ball myth, but y'all don't go out there and stomp these grapes, do you?
No, but actually, but let me start with that. I think that's a really good question. If I was living in California, I would definitely be making wine from real grapes. Okay, meaning that I would get the grapes and I would take them to a co-op. This is what a lot of people do in California, and in the co-op they will crush them for you and take off the skins. Well, because we live in this particular climate of South Carolina, and let me say, the wine that I make is a vinifera wine, which is a word for when all of you go in and order a glass of wine in a restaurant, you're having vinifera wine for the most part, meaning it's Zinfandel, it's Cabernet, it's Merlot, it's all those wine names that you know. So what I'm telling you right from the get-go is, although I like every once in a while, like a fruit wine, a blueberry wine, a scuppernong wine, an apple wine, a pear wine, which you can make right from the fruit here in South Carolina, that's not what I make. Although the process, is very much the same. So unfortunately, I'm working from a kit, from a winemaking kit. However, and this is the first secret I wanted to give everybody this morning, is everything starts with a really good kit. And a kit itself will make roughly 30 bottles. And the kits that I like to buy now usually start at about $120 to $150 on up to maybe kind of $200. So moral of the story here is, if you're going to make relatively good wine, you have to invest in buying a kit, which has pretty good wine. If I was using grapes, let's say, I would be obviously buying from a farmer, a producer, who I knew had a track record of making good wine grapes.
And I imagine Marcy's pretty glad that you don't buy that way, because then she would have to go out and stomp the grapes. Is that correct?
Correct. So,
Okay.
so basically, what it looks like from this kit, I should have described this. It looks like so I'm working from juice, which is very, very thick juice. I also have a bag of skins. I don't know if you're going to show some of the pictures that we had up there, but a bag of skins is kind of sitting in there to give it some extra flavor, and the juice basically has to be watered down with a little bit of water, and then the whole production process starts. Yeah.
Okay, and we are going to show those pictures in just a
Mhm.
few minutes. We
Okay.
thought we'd let you tell us about it first, and then we'll go back and show the photographs. So what is the best thing about, other than having the product easily there at your disposal, what's the best thing about being a homemade, a winemaker, a homemaker?
Well, I don't know that well. Okay, probably the one best thing, it's a really good question, is that all my friends know that I do this, and they all want a bottle of it. And so I'm producing, and you'll see it in some of the pictures later on. I'm producing at any one time about 6 gallons of wine. And every year before bottling, this is going to be the evening, prior to bottling, because I think everybody's listening knows that the biggest enemy of wine is air. Once air hits your wine, it's going to start to go. That's why your wine bottle and your refrigerator or whatever in your couch, when your counter is only lasting for a couple of days or so. So basically, the day before I bottle, we have people over to the house, and they drink the wine right from the big Corboy flask, which holds about, again, 6 gallons. And I have a very long plastic kind of tube that goes right down into it and sucks up the wine, right? And then they hold out their glass, and then they have a chance to try the fresh wine and to make a comment. In the old days, I don't do this as much anymore. They would write the comments on little 3x5 cards, and we'd stop the party. After a little while, there might be 30, 40, 50 people in the house, and we would share the comments. And I think that's one of the fun things, is when my friends get to taste the new, and for this, it'll be, of course, wine for the year 2020. And I've been doing it ever since maybe 2005, 06. Yeah.
I can remember Ken and I coming over a couple of times for one of your wine tastings.
Yeah.
A lot of fun, a lot of fun. Question for you, can homemade wines be aged?
Yes, but the aging potential is usually not that long. I wouldn't recommend it for more than 3, 4, or 5 years. However, sometimes I found an old bottle of mine that's maybe 10, 12, even 12 years old, and I pulled it out, and it's been surprisingly good. Surprisingly, I'm using that because I don't want anybody who's listening to us today to think that I would recommend this wine being aged. I'll tell you a really fast story. Kind of a few years ago, there was a wine contest, that was going on. Everybody was asked to bring a bottle of really good wine, and there were these 20 judges, and it was at somebody's house. So I brought them a bottle of my wine as a house present. Well, one of the people didn't show up. So the host said, "We want to throw your wine in with these other wines, which went from $20 to $200 a bottle. Do you mind?" I said, "Well, I don't really mind, but this is just homemade wine. That basically cost me $5 to make a bottle." They said, "Well, don't worry about it. We're going to do it." So mine was in a little flight of 3 wines, and it came in surprisingly well. It was rated like number 2. But when people went around to describe my wine, and they didn't know what it was, everybody said, "The thing I love about this wine is that it tastes so fresh." That was the word everybody used. And later on, I laughed when we revealed it was homemade wine. I said, "Yeah, it tastes fresh. It went in the bottle yesterday. No wonder it's kind of tastes fresh." I mean, and so that's what you get from homemade wine. You get a different kind of flavor profile. Now, I'll say one other fast thing. I'll throw it back to Mary. I only make reds, okay? Because as many of you know, reds are more forgiving than whites. And I tend to work with heavier reds. So I tend to work with Cabernet, Merlot, Nebbiolo, Zinfandel. I don't work with Pinot Noir, which is obviously a lighter skin sort of grape. I mean, one day I'll sort of try it, but frankly, at this point in time, I don't really want to make an investment potentially of a couple $100 and time, because it can be 2 to 3 months in the production process and end up with something I don't care for. And one last point, I also like to cook. I know we have a lot of cooks, you know, who are listening, but winemaking, in some ways it's like cooking because you follow a recipe. But in one way it's really different because you can't tinker with it. You know, when you're cooking something, oh, you taste it along the way. You see the chef holding stuff up. It needs salt, it needs pepper, you know, whatever. But no, winemaking, unfortunately, once you kind of lay it down, it is what it is. You're going to come back maybe a couple of months later, and that's what you're going to have.
Got it. Now, you talked about judging, and I know you've won awards and ribbons. Tell us a little bit about that. How did they go about judging, and where have your ribbons and awards come from?
Yeah, well, all the ribbons, that I won, and several of them are on some of the pictures that you want to show me, and I probably won 6 or 7 ribbons, probably about 80% of the time that I've entered in the South Carolina State Fair, I've kind of won. I'm the kind of person, unlike some of the other entrants, I only enter 1 bottle a year. And when I say like the other entrants, we're not limited in terms of how many bottles that we can enter. But my thing is, I'm going to enter 1 bottle. It's going to win or it's not. I'm not going to put 3, 4, 5 bottles in. Now, in more direct response to Marie's question, I've also been a wine judge for the state fair. And typically what happens is there might be 75, 80, maybe more wines, and the wine judges go through them really, really quick. They take a quick taste and they say sort of yay or nay. And the nays are set aside and they were never touched again. So they're kind of narrowing the bottles, things down, and then they will get down to, whatever, kind of a smaller number. And then the judges, which might be 4 or 5, will talk amongst themselves, determine who's number 1, who's number 2, who gets a ribbon, things like that.
Very good. Terry, how about if you throw up those photographs that we have that Fred sent to us, and he can walk us through each one of the pictures?
Okay, so what you're seeing here is wine very early in the process, and this is actually before it becomes wine, typically, because what I'm doing is I'm taking the kind of pH, so to speak, of the wine. Because it has to start at a certain number, and then the yeast gets added, and then it will ferment. Yeah, and the alcohol will be produced through the process, and then it will literally become wine kind of later on. But this is where it starts in a very large 6-gallon plastic bucket, not too different than like a kind of Home Depot kind of a big large bucket. I do want to say one thing. This is really important for anybody who wants to try this wine making. One of the most important things, I really haven't spoken about this, is the sterilization process. Every tool that you use has to be really, really sterile, and so you are buying certain chemicals for the sterilization. You sterilize everything, things that you stir, all your equipment, because anything, obviously the bottles, kind of later on, and that's a really important part of it. And the sterilization is really time consuming. It reminds me of when you do painting and you're kind of taping prior to painting. Sterilization is really critical. Let's kind of run through some of the other pictures there.
Next photo, Terry. Terry, there you go.
Okay, and here you actually, this is actually from maybe a day or so ago. And what you're seeing here is what it looks like after a couple of days with the yeast doing its thing. It starts to sort of bubble. And when I look at this, I can actually smell this picture, basically, because this is when it's giving off kind of odors and kind of flavors, and it literally is now becoming wine. Now it's not becoming wine that you want to drink, essentially, because it's going to take a lot more time. And in fact, in the wine I'm making now at this stage, there is no oak, in the wine. When I'm making my red, sometimes I am using a kind of a small barrel, but other times I'm either using oak chips or oak cubes. And based upon when you use chips or cubes is when you add it in the process. The wine I'm making right now, which is a Zinfandel, and I'll talk to you about my names later on, is one where I'm using oak cubes, and the cubes are added later in the process. If I was using chips, they would be added earlier in the process.
I can add, that picture was just a few days ago. Sorry.
But let's run through some of the subsequent pictures. I just saw one. So here you see that barrel, that you pull up from the top. What you're seeing is the actual kit that I'm using, and on this table here are some of the chemicals which are used in some of my equipment and some of my ribbons. Behind the ribbons as a backdrop is my label. Now I call my wine Nursery Hill Winery, basically, okay? Now the question is, where did that come from? Well, I live in a small subdivision called the Nursery Hill subdivision, and that's why I kind of named it. So if I was living in sort of Shandon, I'd call it Shandon Winery, or if I was living in Forest Acres, like whatever. If I was living in 5 Points, for the 5 Points Rotary, I'd name it 5 Points Winery or something. And I think that's kind of part of the fun, of it. I hope we have some time at the end of this for me to talk to you kind of about the names of the wine, because frankly, I'm kind of known as much among my friends by the wine names as I am by the wine itself.
Fred, let me interrupt just a minute. Marcy and I have been talking behind your back, and we're going to we're going to auction off a bottle of your wine today.
Okay.
And the bidding has started. It's $10, and make them in $5 increments. Put it on the chat, and the last person, by the time we end this, get your bottle of wine.
Cool.
Back to Fred.
Okay, well, let's throw up kind of a few more pictures, then I'm sure you'll have questions at the end. Okay, so here what you can see is, and I'm glad that I'm looking at this because you can see my corks. So basically, when I'm making 6 gallons of wine, this is a question some people might have had: how many bottles do I end up with? And if I'm making all standard 750 bottles, your typical wine bottle, I'm producing, if I was doing all of those, I would be producing anywhere from 25 to 30 bottles. Of wine. Now, some of this is going to be dependent upon if I have the party the evening before and people are drinking my wine. Here, the bottle, the 2 little bottles in the middle are little splits, little 375s, and typically I'll produce maybe 15, 20 375s, and the rest 750s. Every once in a while, if I know I need one, I'll produce kind of a magnum. So that bottle number 4 over, you can see is a little larger. We do all the filtering, on premises, clearing, so the wine the wine looks like wine. It's really clear. Marcy's job is the labeling, and the corking and the topping. All right, you're going to see a picture, later on, of me actually corking, the bottles, but we apply the tops through kind of boiling water and kind of a fast dipping. Sometimes they recommend the hair dryer, but frankly, we've never felt that really worked very well. It kind of crinkles. So when you receive a bottle of, a finished product of my wine, it really does look like a regular bottle of wine that you would kind of get from a store.
Is there another slide, Terry?
Okay, this is a good picture, because basically what it's showing is where the wine is located later on in the process. So it starts in that large, container, Home Depot kind of container, but it ends up in the 6-gallon glass bottle, which is called a Corboy, C-O-R-B-O-Y. And at some point, we have to take the wine from the core boy and put it into the bottles, on the bottling day. And what you're looking at now is the bottling day, kind of essentially. And so this, the wine over here is going to begin to go down as we put it into the bottles. And it doesn't go all the way down, because even after a couple filterings, along the way, filtering out sediment, essentially, filtering out the dregs, there's still going to be some dregs, left, in the bottom. So we're always very careful, and this is a tip to future winemakers, not to get too much of those dregs, in your bottles. Okay, get rid of that, because that's going to make your wine look cloudy. Now, it's not going to affect the actual taste, that much. But most of us, don't like to drink, wine that's cloudy. And cloudiness is not the same as the normal sediment that you would normally see with an aged bottle of wine. So what you're seeing here me now is moving it from the core boy directly into the bottles, which are below my hands, and you really can't see that. Okay, can we next slide? And here you see me corking, kind of basically. I have this hand corker. Because I'm only doing 30 bottles at a time, I use this little hand corker. There's better corkers if you're doing more kind of a production. But for all of us who are quite amateurs, I mean, this is basically the way to do it. So you're getting an idea also through these slides of seeing the kinds of equipment which is being used. With the bottles, the corks, the corker, the pour boy, the big 6-gallon plastic container that we're working with, right? And that clearly is an investment that one has to make, and that's kind of why, at the end of all this, if you were to say, well, Fred, what does it cost you to make a bottle of wine, a regular 750 bottle of wine? The answer is about $5 or $6. Now it's interesting because some of you are thinking, well, how come Chuck can make it for a couple dollars with like a $2 Chuck? And the answer is, that's amazing that somebody can make a bottle of wine for like $2 or $3. And some of that wine is good. So part of the moral of the story here is, you're not making amateur wine to save money. If you want cheap wine, this is not the way to do it. And you can probably buy a pretty decent commercial bottle of wine for $5 or $6. But I feel that the wine which I'm making, well, clearly oftentimes is as good as that, and sometimes kind of a lot better. And when it won, the award, so to speak, in this judging, it was really rated higher than a $50, $60, $70 bottle of wine.
Wow. Very good. Terry, I think that's all the slides that we have. If you'll put us back on gallery, we do have a couple of questions here for you, Fred.
Yep.
Oh, one last one. Sorry.
Okay, here what you're seeing here is after sort of wine bottling day. And we usually kind of line them up, on the table again. I'm producing, again, roughly 25 to 30 regular 750 ml bottles. But because I decide to choose the 375s, which I give away as gifts. And maybe I should have said this kind of earlier. You're making homemade wine for your own personal consumption and for gifts, because you need a license to sell it. So if somebody ever says to me personally, hey, I'd like to give you, say, $10 for a bottle of your wine, the answer is no. Okay, I can't sell wine to you. What I can give is, say, my Rotary Club a bottle of wine that they can auction off and things kind of like that. Or if it's a friend's birthday, or I can trade, because all of us make something, right? Whether you make jams or jellies or homemade pickles or whatever it is, somebody says, oh, can I trade some of my homemade jam? Sure, for a bottle of wine. Yeah, I do that a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Terry, you want to throw us back up to gallery? There you go. Very good. Do have a couple of questions for you. What is the alcohol content of your wines, Fred?
Well, that's a good question. I think it varies from wine to wine. I think it's about between 14 and 16%. Okay, but that's something, to be honest, I do not always measure. I really don't kind of care about that. You know, it always seems to me to resemble, you know, store-bought wine. It's about at that level. Yeah.
Okay, and someone asked if you had ever had dandelion wine, that it's a big thing in the Midwest.
No, no, I didn't. I've really had a lot of different kinds of wine because, at one time, not only was I a judge, you know, at the state fair, I was a judge at a local sort of wine wine and beer production shop. And people would bring in all kinds of wine. Probably the most unusual wine I've had was wine made from jalapenos. Okay. Yeah. And it was surprisingly good. How you know a good bottle of wine, this is a little trivia for everybody, is whether the wine tastes like what it's supposed to taste like. So if somebody gave me some dandelion wine, and if I had a dandelion in front of me, I could smell the dandelion. I would want to know that the dandelion wine smelled like dandelions and tasted like what I would think a dandelion should taste like. It's not about whether it tastes good or not. It's actually about whether it mirrors the underlying fruit, you know, or the flower, you know, that you're dealing with.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a comment here. It's when my father used to make wine from scratch. He fermented it in 2-gallon jars with a fermentation lot. Do you use such devices?
No, no, and let me. That's a really good question. Good question, and let me say why. Because I'm working with a kit. Okay, the kits are set up to use a 6-gallon production method. All right. If I was to try and say, you know what, I don't want to do 30 bottles. I want to do 15. Maybe I'm going to throw away half of the juice that I start with. What I understand is that it wouldn't work. It wouldn't kind of come out the same. You know, the companies that produce this are saying you really have to follow our standard recipe. Okay. And so this is where I think winemaking does differ from let's say, cooking. You know, if somebody says you got to cook, you know, so much of a product, you say, well, I only have 3 people in my family. This is a recipe for 7. I'm going to cut it down. It doesn't work the same way with wine.
Okay, and what's the average cost of a kit?
Okay, you can get a kit probably for as low as maybe $60, $70. Okay. And when I first started, I was working with kits which were under $100, and they were okay. Now, when I buy a kit, it's generally up around $180. Okay, and let me say this: it's not about the money per se. I'm looking for kits where the juice inside has won an award, and usually there'll be something on the outside, like a sticker that says something like judged top wine at the San Francisco Fair or something like that. I also like to go online and to read the comments that people have made about that wine. Okay, all right.
So you do your research.
I do. I write it. I do the research. I don't know how much time we have left, so let me kind of mention. I know I'm going to take more questions if we have time, but let me mention the names, because that's one of the fun parts of this, and I'll be really quick. So I decided to name one of my very first wines. It was a Zinfandel. This is one I'm most famous for. I call it Zinfreddel. Okay, and everybody wants and so right now I am making Zin again, and I don't know if I'm going to call it Son of Zinfreddel or Zinfreddel 2. Okay. I've done Zinfreddel. I've done Fred the Med Red. I've done a wine, you know, as a homage to kind of being, you know, in the mental health field, that I called because it was a blend of several distinct personalities, that I called schizophrenic. I've done really many different, and so a lot of times, the naming of it is a lot of fun.
Got it. Those are fun.
Yeah.
I think we have a question from Bob Gross.
Hi, Fred.
Hi.
when we toured wineries several years ago, they made a big deal about a whole lot of variables, not just the type of grape, but how the grape was squeezed, whether it was mashed by some little old ladies out there in their bare feet, or they were gently massaged. How long the skin stayed in the wine, what type of barrel or thing was in, how long it was there, all those variables.
Yes.
And of course, the aging. Since you don't do the aging, do you buy your wines? You don't control all that, but how do you know what the variables are, and how do you choose those?
Okay. And the answer is I don't know. Your point is a very well taken point. Okay. So that's why I have to go by this generic that this is one of the most expensive kits, and or that it's won these awards. But the point you're making is an excellent point, because when we start talking about high-end wine, it's about two things. It's about labor and supply and demand. There's a reason why a first growth Bordeaux today can cost $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 a bottle. That's what they go for. And why is it? It's supply and demand. They only produce so much, and all the rich people are buying it up, and they're driving up the price. But the other aspect of it is, why are those Bordeaux wines or other kinds of wines so expensive? Because there's people who walk out into the field, and they handpick the grapes, just like what you're saying, and they look at it. And this one stays, and these three go. Now, the three that go may end up in a lesser wine. And then there's all the other variables that you mentioned, and the land and the weather and the type of barrel, whether it's a French oak or a Hungarian barrel. Yes, that's what really is, and that's why when somebody says, "Well, why is this wine so good for $50? Is it really better than a $10 or $15 bottle of wine?" Well, some of it depends upon one's palate. But the reason why some wines cost $50 or $100 is about labor, is about production, and why they cost $500 or $1,000. It's all about supply and demand. So don't ever have somebody say to you or tell you, "Oh, $1,000 bottle of wine costs tastes 3 times as good as a $300 bottle of wine." It doesn't. Okay. It's simply that around the world, people want that bottle, and they will pay to get it, and it drives up the price.
Understood. So you got to watch out for those variables. Bob, you have another question?
Fred, one last thought. As a chemical engineer at South Carolina, we weren't so much interested in wine. Chemical engineers like distillation. So we took Caro corn syrup, Fleischmann's yeast, a 26-plate glass distillation column, and we made some hooch that would literally burn by flame, not just down your palate. So right. Making your own can be a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun, yeah. It's fun.
One last question for you, Fred. Somebody has asked, how dry is the wine you produce?
Yes, it's dry. Okay. Now, but let me say, it's a very good question. So let's go back to my earlier point. I only make heavier red wines. So those wines are going to be drier reds, and they're going to have more tannin than some other kinds of wines. However, if you take one of my Zinfandels or one of my Cabernets or one of my Italian wines, they're not going to be as tannic or as dry, because that's what you're referring to with the dryness question, as something that you might buy from the store. Now, the dryness or the tannin is also implicated in the aging process. So if you want to age your wine for 5 or 10 or 15 years, you really need dry wine. I'll kind of close with this. One of my favorite California Cabernets is Caymus. And Caymus goes for like $75 a bottle. And Mary mentioned that Marcy and I cruise. I basically would not go on a cruise ship and spend $120 for a bottle of Caymus, right? Yeah, it's overpriced. But the thing is, what they're going to give you in a cruise or hotel, or what you might pick up from a wine shop, is probably Caymus, maybe 2017. Well, a heavy California Cabernet really needs time, okay? And you really, and I'm not encouraging you not to buy 2017 Camus, but if you're buying 2017 Camus, you better wait 3 or 4 years from even now, 2020, to kind of drink it, to kind of smooth out. So any of you who are thinking about, oh, I want to, you know, I just came into a lot of money, you know, I want to buy this $200 bottle of wine, like in a restaurant, you know, for dinner. The reason why you might be disappointed is many of these big California and Australian reds really need time, and you really should not drink them over your meal.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fred.
You're welcome.
One other comment, Bob, I think what you refer to as hooch used to be called moonshine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it still is.
Something like that. Yeah,
It's still called moonshine.
still
Yeah.
is. Still
Yeah.
is called moonshine.
We didn't pay any taxes on it, I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
assure you.
You probably didn't have Burt Reynolds taking it from state to state either. Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you, Fred.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. The last bid we had was Paul Walters at $30. So you've got until we close out this CWRAP to get your bid in. But if nobody tops it, Paul, you got a bottle of wine coming to you. It could be the crazy Zinfandel, maybe?
Well,
I don't know.
it's going to probably be, is Marcy still on?
Yes.
Okay, what was that last one that we made that's in the bottle? Was that
We have,
the Nebbiolo?
we have the Bella Nipotina, which
Bella
means
Nipotina.
beautiful granddaughter,
Yeah.
named for our granddaughter. And then
Yeah.
we have the Titanin,
Oh, Titanic.
which
Yeah,
tied in our love for cruising of Titanic and tannins in wine.
yeah,
I think the Titanin is the last one
yeah.
that we made. And we haven't named this 2021. And I think we ought to wait until 2021 to name it. I don't want to be remembered about
Yeah.
2020.
All right,
Yeah,
2020 is not over yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're up to 35, just to let you know, Paul, that Mary Louise has jumped in ahead of you there. Fred, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Great information, and glad to have you on CWRAP. I
Thank
hope
you.
you'll do it again.
Yeah.
Next week,
Enjoyed
Donna
that.
will be, thanks, Marcy. Next week, Donna will be back, and we have Meredith Rosenbeck with the Honor Flight Network. She's going to talk to us. Just for your information, we are booked through October, 3 days a week. A lot of bookings, a lot of good things coming up. If you know of someone who has an interesting job or hobby, whatever, let us know and let's see if we can get them on here. And a special shout out to Terry, because Terry, you have done a great job in helping me get speakers, and I appreciate it so much. So let's see, got any more bids? Mary Louise, are you? Okay, I'll let you know. I'll get you up. I'll get you the information on how to pay and where we're going to send it. Fred, again, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us. That's a wrap.